Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am excited to connect you all with Jim Henderson. He is going to give us a recap for the 2022 legislative session that just ended. And I want to thank everybody for sticking with us today through our many technical difficulties and with your great questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Jim, and after he is done, we will open it up for questions and answers. Okay, take it away, Jim.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I am Jim Henderson, and I am one of the lobbyists for the Rental Housing Association. And during the legislative session, we have what's called the Rental Housing Association Coalition, which where all of the housing associations all come together under kind of one collective effort, and we kind of work together on legislative issues. So again, thank you for having me. So I want to start by saying that what I'm going to cover here are state bills. Please understand that in different cities and counties, there are additional requirements to what the state bills require. So please keep in mind that if you're in a jurisdiction that has other requirements, those are in addition to what's required in these new state bills. So let's start with talking about some bills that did not make it all the way through. This year, the 2022 session was what we call a short session. It was a 60-day session. It started on January 10th and ended on March 10th. And we ended just within a few minutes of being on time. So we ended at like 11:56 p.m. on March 10th. So first bill that didn't make it through is House Bill 1300. This bill has been around. This was its third year. And this bill would have changed the process in which we do move outs. Particularly, this is Representative Ty's bill. And, again, I don't know that we'll see this bill back again next year, but each year we see a bill, there's some sort of change to it. Alexis, if people have questions, are we going to save those all to the end, or is somebody moderating those during?
Whatever you prefer, we can take questions if you want them now or at the end. It's up to you.
All right, it's up to you actually. So whatever.
Okay, we'll take them at the end then.
Okay, great. All right, House Bill 1515. We're going to come back and talk about this bill when we talk about bills that passed, but this particular House bill, it did not pass. This bill would have been would have allowed for your resident to purchase what we call a security deposit alternative product. And in lieu of paying the security deposit in full, they would have been able to buy a bond or insurance product, which would allow them to pay a fee every month in lieu of the security deposit. This bill did not pass. This was Representative Peterson's bill, but remember this bill because we're going to come back and talk about this. There was a bill that would have made more changes to our notice to pay or vacate. And here are some examples of some of the language that would have changed in this bill. And it also would have removed what we call the three strikes law. The three strikes law is that if you serve your resident with 3 or more notices to pay or vacate in a 12-month period, the court does not have discretion to reinstate the tenancy. So probably if Nicholas, if he's already presented, he would have told you about there's a fund, the Tenancy Preservation Program. Well, that fund is where the court can enter an order that restores the tenancy by allowing you to submit a claim to Commerce for all of the back rent and costs associated, essentially a judgment the court would enter. There's a process which Commerce would pay that and reinstate the tenancy. So what this rule is that if what this bill would have done is if it would have removed that 3 strikes language. So currently, because this bill did not pass, we currently still have the 3 strikes language. So if you give your tenant 2 notices, the court can still reinstate tenancy, but if you give them 3 or more, the court cannot reinstate the tenancy through the Tenancy Preservation Program. Just as a note, as we've known for the last 4 years, we've seen, well, let's say 3 years, we saw changes to the notice to pay or vacate. We saw it went from a 3-day to a 14-day. That was the most significant change, but then also it went into statute. So these changes, while they don't seem like a big deal, where we get concerned is that then if landlords, if they miss the change, then it causes their notice to be defective. So we always want to make it as simple as possible for landlords to be able to comply with the rules. Criminal records would have been banned. And there would have been a pretty high penalty if you violated this rule. As you know, in certain cities, criminal records are already not allowed to be used. This essentially would have made that policy statewide. I'm going to come back here to this bill and talk about how it's something to look at. I'm kind of moved through this, but looking at who represents bills, because you'll see where you have people that represent bills and those bills died, and then you'll see where those same people who are on bills, where those bills pass, and we can talk a little bit about why that happens. This House Bill 2023 would, under the Consumer Protection Act, it would have allowed your resident to, if you made a mistake, a small mistake in maybe issuing the wrong notice, maybe it's supposed to be a 90-day notice and you issued a 60-day notice. If you issued the wrong version of the notice to pay or vacate, if you served a notice of rent increase incorrectly, any small mistake, or if you didn't know that your lease, that there's a change. Maybe your lease says you can get 20 days notice to terminate tenancy, and now the law requires something different. Any of those small kind of mistakes that you may have had in not updating your forms or using the wrong form, your tenant would have been able to sue the landlord under the Consumer Protection Act with the full force of the Attorney General's office behind them. So this bill did not pass. That, of course, would be concerning to landlords, that while they're trying to do their very best to comply with all the changes, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, there are cities and counties where the compliance is in addition to the state law. So not only is the state law changed and it in itself is complicated, but then the local rules also are on top of that, which are also complicated and sometimes conflicting. So we were glad to see that this bill did not pass. Not to say, if a tenant is harmed, or if something happens and where, there is a remedy to that, and currently. So this bill doesn't represent that that the tenants don't have remedies. It's just this remedy is would be really onerous, and if I remember correctly, the penalty on that was, in the thousands of dollars. I think it was over $5,000 was the penalty, in addition to fees and costs. So, House Bill 1904, this bill got a lot of attention. This bill was run by Representative Peterson. He's also the chair of the House Housing Committee. This is a bill that its original form would have required you to give between 180 and 220 days notice for any rent increase over 3%. It also would have kind of created a new definition of what is base rent. Currently, there is a definition of rent, and we don't have a definition for base rent. It also would have capture late fee at 1.5% of the unpaid rent. And if your resident was to have received a notice of rent increase and that caused them to want to move, then they could have at any time vacated the unit prior to the end of their lease without notice and without any penalty. This was another concern for landlords, and that we still believe that a contract is a contract, and that everybody should be obligated to uphold the terms of the contract. So while the resident may choose to leave at the end of their tenancy, of course, the rent increase doesn't take effect during the term of their lease. It only takes effect at the end or into a new lease if that's how they operated. But This also creates, if you see the 180, 220 days, that's a complicated time frame. And again, another kind of gotcha. And the intent behind that is so that you can't give notice of a rent increase at the beginning of the tenancy. However, another concern that landlords had around the 180 to 220 days is, could you potentially be asking for more than a necessary rent increase because you're projecting what your costs are? And but on the other end of that, could you also not ask for enough because, again, maybe you projected wrong? In the last 2 years, we saw really high property tax increases, and along with increases in the cost for insurance and the cost of water. So if you weren't able to project what those were accurately, you may have not covered all of your costs. Well, let's talk about some bills that did pass. We passed House Bill 5749, which is Senator Trudeau's bill. Senator Trudeau, this is her first session, and she came out with a bill that essentially does not allow landlords to require residents to pay electronically. Landlords have to offer the option of for the resident to be able to pay in a paper form of payment, cash, money, check, money order, cashier's check, and give them either a mailing address or a physical address where they can make that payment. Electronic payments can be an option, but it cannot be the only option for how to pay rent. Landlords in this bill, landlords are not required to accept cash.
According to thebalance.com.
So
you're just looking for much.
So that's a pretty easy bill. I would say that probably broadly, this is the practice in the industry. So there was no issue in supporting Senator Trudeau on this bill. This bill makes sense. Again, I think it mirrors what the practice is already out there. House Bill 1593. This is a bill that creates a new fund at the Landlord Mitigation Fund for domestic violence victims. This bill works in the same way as the Landlord Mitigation Fund for damages to a unit if you're renting to a resident who's on a subsidy or a voucher. Whereas when they vacate, if there's damages or unpaid rent, you can apply back to Commerce for up to $5,000 for reimbursement. This particular fund is for victims of domestic violence. If you're a resident after move out, if you're notified they're a victim of domestic violence, and when they move out, there's damages over the $5,000, then you're able, if there's damages that exceed the amount of the security deposit, then you're able to apply back to Commerce for up to $5,000. This bill is important because what happens is in the cycle of abuse is that when the victim vacates, when the debt that isn't that's over the amount of the security deposit, when that is submitted to collections, the collection agency goes after both parties, and the victim is re-abused by the other person because of that debt. And so the abuser reaches out and they're doing things to re-victimize. So this bill stops that cycle of abuse. So this is a great bill and a really important bill. This bill was run by Representative Levitt, who is also on the House Housing Committee. And then the final bill is House Bill 2064. This bill is, and we have started with this security deposit alternative. I mentioned House Bill 1515. Well, what happened was House Bill 2064 came out in a very different form than what it passed in. So what we were able to do is we were able to do what's called a striker, and we were able to put House Bill 1515 with some changes over the top of and replace House Bill 2064 with the House Bill 1515 with a few changes. So this is a bill that does have a process for if you would like to offer your resident the option of being able to purchase a security alternative product in lieu of paying the security deposit up front. this bill kind of walks you through what those requirements are and what your obligation is in providing disclosures to your resident about that product. So again, the landlord isn't selling the product. What the landlord is doing is saying, I will accept this product. And then the resident is going out into the marketplace and they're working with one of the companies that offer the product in lieu of a security deposit. And what the landlord is doing is that there's a form that's built into the statute that just notifies and just provides a disclaimer to the resident that essentially that paying a monthly fee is not refundable. It is not going toward a security deposit, which is refundable. And also let them know that at any time that they wish to stop paying the fee, they could pay the security deposit in full, and what that dollar amount would be. And then the last kind of math that they want us to show is that if the resident is paying a certain amount every month times the term of the lease, what is that amount versus if they were to pay the full amount of the deposit? At some point, while in maybe year 1, year 2, they still haven't paid as much as the deposit in monthly fees, but by about year 3, it starts to get very close and maybe exceeds what they paid in monthly payments versus the full amount of the original deposit. So, as you can see, we have lots of bills that we worked on that did not pass, and we have 3 bills that did pass. And again, talking about this last bill that we're talking about is Representative Peterson's bill, who again, House Chair. So you see, sometimes representatives have bills that pass, and sometimes they have bills that don't pass. So it's all part of the makeup of the legislature and their committee. There's more information about that House Bill 2064 that passed, and just a couple things. The legislature funded $3 million for toward the eviction resolution pilot program. This was added to what they had funded last year. They invested in an additional $3 million. There's $1 million that was out of the general budget that was invested back into right to counsel, again, because we're in a supplemental budget year this year. So this is in addition to the funding that that was in the biennial budget from last year. $27 million was invested into the Landlord Mitigation Fund, and of that $27 million, $2 million was invested in the domestic violence landlord mitigation bucket for those claims. And just next year, look out if you get information about the Rental Housing Coalition. It's a free coalition. All landlords are welcome to join us. We meet, during session, we meet every Monday at 10 a.m. We talk about current bills and upcoming bills. We also hold what we call green rooms or briefing room, where you come in and you get to practice testimony. We talk about a bill that's up for hearing. As many of you probably know, during the last 2 years, 2 sessions, so last year and this year during session, they were remote. And I do know that the legislature is going to continue to keep the remote portion of session where you can sign in on bills remotely, and you can also give testimony remotely. Prior to COVID, the only way you could sign in on a bill was to be on campus at the Capitol, and the only way that you could testify on a bill is to actually show up in person to give testimony. So those 2 features are going to stay with us as we go into a live session next year. So that's great, because what that allows us is we're able to see, hundreds, if not, we've seen bills where over 1,000 people have signed in with their position on a bill. We saw over 5,900 emails to lawmakers on these bills that I just talked about. And again, thousands of people signing in overall on all of the bills. And then hundreds of people providing testimony. There would oftentimes be more than 100 people signed in on a bill, and the committee could only accommodate an hour of time, so they could only give each person 1 minute. So they would cut it down to as short as a minute to get as many people in to give testimony. I had to say, Chair Peterson, who on the House Housing, he did a really great job of really facilitating as many people being able, having the opportunity to give testimony. And that's kind of as we all know, being on Zoom, there's a lot of things going on so for them to be in that kind of an environment, but also trying to navigate electronically, getting people on deck and making sure that we've got balance of pros and cons. That's all the chair and other committee members who are kind of helping staff with that. And then there's some more information about the Rental Housing Association and their advocacy on behalf of landlords statewide. And then I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you, Jim. Let's see here. So where can we obtain all the legislative updates, including the state, county, and state? It is very difficult to stay on top of all the ever-changing rules. And I know I recommend folks maybe get hooked up with Rental Housing Association of Washington. There's a lot of different resources out there for you. Jim, what would you say?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is complex, it is confusing, and it is, state level, we change it once a year, but, in cities like Seattle, they're changing it monthly. And even in King County, you see things happen more than once a year. And then what you do see, it's hard to understand or know how to comply with it. So I would say that your best investment is in a membership with a housing association, like the Rental Housing Association, where they're doing all that work for you, and they're holding classes and meetings, and they're providing blog posts, and they're just, there's just a regular output of member education around those changes. And I would say the other great thing is if you like to be active in the process, there's lots of opportunities through the advocacy to attend council meetings, and they send out that information in advance to give you all the information you would need in order to join and give public comment on upcoming ordinances.
Thank you. And when is the domestic violence victim bill taking effect? In other words, when do such victims become eligible for claims to Commerce?
That's a good question for Nicholas on when those claims, but all of the 3 bills that passed, their effective date is June 9th. Those become the law on June 9th. So my guess would be that any sort of claim on or after June 9th would be eligible for that to be submitted through that claim. And I would also, Nicholas put some comments in the chat. It also is most likely that if you look at Commerce's website, they are excellent at letting us know, things about these funds, like when they expire, when they go through. It's brilliantly just laid out and easy to read, and it's easy to follow and understand. So you can go to Commerce's website, and then they would also probably once there's an eligibility to apply for that fund, there will be you'll see a column where you'll be able to see it. So when you see it, probably is when it's open.
And Nicholas said mid-June.
Yep.
When that'll happen. And we have some shout outs to you, Jim, because you are great. So Jim, you're great. That's what it says. I'm not at all. Oh, what was that?
I think I know who that is.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Okay. I'm not at all familiar with fee in lieu of deposit. Who are they paying to and for what? Is it like deposit insurance?
Yeah, I think it is. We're all very new to this. So security deposit alternatives are not new. They're new to us. So kind of the short history is they're very popular in the Midwest, like Texas, and on the East Coast. There are 2 different styles that I've seen. I've seen a bond product and an insurance product. And how these things are different is that insurance is regulated by the state, by Washington State regulates all insurance, no matter what it is. So companies have to comply and be registered as an insurance company. And how insurance is underwritten, or how you're approved, which is the underwriting process for the product, has its own specific criteria. that is different than a bond product. A product with a bond, think of it kind of like a contractor's bond, where you're paying a monthly fee. There's a bond for a value, but the state, it's not run as insurance. It doesn't operate like insurance in this, and by that it means that it's not underwritten or approved like insurance. But what it also might mean is that you can't get as much of a deposit. So we're learning about these two options. What we don't know is entirely like, how do you access them? So they were developed and designed primarily for the multifamily housing industry and for particularly like A grade property. So maybe where the deposit would be like $250, the deposit fee would be fairly low to cover that amount of money. The business model for these companies is, let's go to one site and we have 100, 200, 300 units where we have business. I don't know that they envision single family owners. And so we have single family property managers who may have 100+ doors in their portfolio. Maybe that's a fit, but I'm not sure what the criteria is going to be for us, like myself, who own just a couple of rentals, if we're even eligible, or if they'll even consider us as clients. So we have a lot to learn about the accessibility of that, and then how to use it, and then how do we purchase it? Are we purchasing it on behalf of our resident? Is our resident going directly? And I think that might vary depending on the company. I will say that the intent of it, and I think this is always important in legislation, is understanding the intent. The intent is that it helps remove a barrier to somebody getting into housing. So it oftentimes is a huge barrier to somebody who maybe has the money to move in with first, but yet they don't have the money for first last deposit, or maybe they have first and deposit but not first last deposit, or there's an increased deposit because maybe there's something in their screening that maybe causes the landlord to ask for increased deposit or a co-signer. So the intent is that it would alleviate that financial output for someone and allow them to get into a unit more easily financially.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you for all of the work that you have been doing at the state level. And thank you for always being willing to come talk to our housing provider partners as well. And again, do you have any suggestions for the group today that attended? Or
continue to participate in all the learning that you can participate in. It's always great to listen to all sorts of different perspectives. We're all of the laws when laws change each year, and so like June 9th is when these new laws will become effective. There's a period of time where everybody's learning those laws together. So the more you can be a part of those conversations and hear about people's experiences and kind of what the outcomes of those are, or how they're navigating those are always helpful. If you're in the Pierce County area, if you own property or manage property in Pierce County, we have what's called the Pierce County Housing Providers Group. And if you send your information to Alexis, she can get that information to us. And that's just a group of just Pierce County housing providers who we meet monthly, and we talk about issues, and we always have a guest speaker. So always, if we talk about rental assistance, we have the county come in, give us an update on the rental assistance dollars. So we're always trying to find something that's really relevant. This month is April, so we have a guest speaker coming in for fair housing. But we're always trying to give you a legislative update, talk about what's going on here from people, like maybe where they need supports, and provide that information, because it is confusing and there's been a lot of changes, and we just want to be there to support the housing community with that information.
thank you, Jim. And do we have any additional questions from the housing providers in the audience? All right, well, again, thank you so much, Jim. And we are going to send a poll out to everybody that attended and registered for our symposium today. So please fill that out. And then we are also going to do a gift card drawing after we get those surveys back. And I want to again thank my colleagues here at all the other housing authorities, and I'm pretty sure we'll be doing this again. Do my fellow colleagues have any additional information they want to share with the group?
Well, we just wanted to thank everybody that took time out today to come and join us and ask some really great questions. Also, great thanks to the Housing Connector. Nick Hugh is always there for us, and he brings a lot of funding, so that is a great relief to our housing providers. And Jim, you've always been there as well. So thank you so much for helping our housing providers stay on the right side of the law and keeping them abreast of what the changes are coming in the coming legislature. So hopefully we get more units and we're able to house some of those EHVs that we are trying to house. So thank you so much to everybody. And thanks, Alexis. You were a great coordinator here. So thank you. And thank you to everybody else that participated.
All right.